UKMotorTalk.
Welcome along. This is UK Motor Talk. Hello, I'm back. I've got a raging cold and I'm stuffy as hell. But this is episode 197, like the Clio. How suitably French. And I will come back to that in a minute. I'm Mike. Hello.
Hello, I'm Jim.
I'm Graham. Hello.
And how are we all?
Yes, not too bad. I'm sorry to hear you're ill again, although we've decided you have been ill every day this year, haven't we?
Yes.
It's awful. What is wrong with you?
Well, basically, it's a very simple equation where I pay £72 a day to a nursery. They look after my child and they hand him back and I get a new virus every 2 weeks. Just in time, usually, for the next podcast. So this week it's a cold, but next week, goodness knows. Anyway, this week, there's lots going on, isn't there, in terms of car launches because of Geneva. And we've been watching and some interesting stuff that's been coming out of Geneva.
We were reminiscing our visit to Geneva a few years ago, weren't we? Although we weren't missing the hotel that we ended up staying in because it was a lot cheaper. But we did find a similar hotel today, didn't we? And we were looking at a work-related trip next week to France again, and we found a hotel room that was identical with the weird bathroom pod plonked in the side of it. But then we found a room that was even pod. That was it. Yeah, we found a room that was even better though, wasn't it? Because the bunk beds, the kitchen, the glass panelled shower, and the toilet were all within 12 inches of each other. It was one room with two beds,
distance,
a shower, a toilet, and UK building regulations state something along the lines of there must be 2 doors in between a toilet and a kitchen, something like that. This I don't think there were 2 feet in between the toilet and the kitchen in this one room that we found. So that was a definite no, because I did not want to be woken up halfway through the night with you tipping out and then just you having a shower stood in front of the bed. It was just the most bizarre layout of a room.
Anywho, back to Geneva. So France, and there are some things coming out of France that we actually do want to see. And I never thought I would say that I really desperately want a Renault. This is the new Renault 5.
Well, I think we said this when we first saw it at Goodwood.
It was Goodwood.
A couple of years ago. Yeah, a couple of years ago, I think. And it was on the Renault stand and nice and bright yellow, and it looked amazing. It was like, well, yeah, but if they actually make it and it looks like that, then I suppose, yes, it'll be good. But it does actually look like that, doesn't it? It's spot on.
So the Renault 5, which is now an EV, looks remarkably like the old Mark II Renault 5, sort of around in the late 80s, early 90s when we were kids. And
not all of us.
Yeah, well, when some of us were kids, and yes, it's a nostalgia trip, but they've taken some really interesting design cues from the 5 turbos. So you've got box arches for a start. It's a 3-door, and it looks more like a 2-door. It's got a concealed rear handle, but this thing is hatchback. This thing is excellent to look at. It has some really good detailing to it, and if you think when the Mini was launched, as in the BMW Mini, back in 2001, revealed in 1997. That thing, people looked at it and went, bloody hell, this is different from the Mark IV Fiestas and the like of the time, the plastic fantastic Corsas. And people, God, this is a real departure. And it goes to show that in a small, relatively expensive car, this is about 25 grand, this car.
But bearing in mind the Fiesta, I think we had a look the other day. There's about 3 left in the country unsold. Well, actually, not even in the country. I found one on the Orkney Islands that was unregistered, so a bit of a trek to go and get it. But it was what was that for a normal titanium that came with hubcaps? 24, 25 grand,
something like that. Yeah, 20. So I think 22 and a bit was the cheapest. 22, 23 was the cheapest you could buy.
Yeah, for the really, really basic one. So for this to be 25-ish, actually is cracking value in today's climate, isn't it?
It is.
It is a very, very good-looking car. And
really
it looks like Renault have hit the right design spot again, and this is a car that will catch on and in a big way. It'll certainly sell well in Europe, I have no doubt, but the Americans loved the original Renault 5. They called it Le Car. It was about as French as it was going to get.
This thing has potential to be Renault's Mini or Renault's Fiat 500. The detailing is excellent. Quilted headlining with the little diamonds in like kind of like the original, nod to the original. Some really nice detailing on the interior trims and controls. Even the selector for the drive is shaped like a French lipstick with a Renault badge on the end. Just tiny little details that they've added that they didn't need to. The edge of the headlamps, little tricolor at the top in the corners, just really nice bits of jewellery, bits of attention to detail, which has been so lacking in modern cars for some time. And I guess the Fiesta's an example. When it fizzled out, it had lost a lot of its character, the individual touches. The nice bits had been chiseled away by accountants over the years. And you look at this thing and go, genuinely, it's interesting to look at, and it would be a pleasure to own that. You'd be proud of it.
And they've beaten the add-on merchants because, going back to the original Mini, and it's been a feature of virtually all small cars that have become cult cars over the years, is that the add-on merchants have devised everything that you would want to titivate the car to your particular tastes. Renault seem to have basically anything that could be added to it is on their extras list, including the baguette holder. There's shades of the 2CV and its egg basket, but it does seem to be one of the things that can turn a car like that into a cult car is all the things you can do to personalise it, and even going, dare I say, as far back as the Model T Ford, because there were whole catalogues when that was around. It was a stripped out, built for a price car, but there were whole catalogues of things you could buy to make driving it slightly pleasanter, make it slightly different to the one your neighbour had, because you can bet your boots that your neighbour did have one. And you could personalise it endlessly. And that seems to be one of those things about cult cars. The Beetle, very much the same thing. Loads of things that you can add to that. And these days we're going slightly up market or up size. The new VW camper van, the EV one. There's
The
already the Buzz. There are whole catalogues of things that you can buy to personalise that. I think it's a sign of a car that's really catching on with the public.
I think it should drive rather pleasantly, shouldn't it? Because the Megane E-Tech thingy-doodah that we drove at the SMMT test day was a rather nice thing to pedal around in, wasn't it? That drove quite nicely, I thought.
It surprised me. It did surprise me.
That was it, yeah. I think we were pleasantly surprised by it, weren't we?
Yeah, I think when you have lots of nice little touches and something feels that is of a higher quality, and as you say, is personalisable to you, you feel more attached to it. I'm just looking as it happens at a picture of the Renault 5 concept, 2021 concept, next to the Renault 5 production car, because the car that you can see now, if you do a quick Google, it looks really, really similar. There's a couple of small differences. The concept car had Renault across the front grille that lit up and the badge lit up on the front. That doesn't do it on the real car, but you get some really nice motifs boxing out where the fog lamps would be, and in the headlamps there's sort of a square light that's there. And one really, really nice touch that I think is excellent, they've gone to town on the very retro 5, which was a feature in the early cars. And that's repeated on the doors, it's repeated in the boot lid, but also on the top of the bonnet, where you used to have a little vent on the front left as you were sat inside the car, or front right as you're looking at it at the top. They put this 5 on there, and when your car's plugged in, that lights up that 5 in stages to show the state of charge at a glance. So if you're looking at the car from outside, you can just look out the window or whatever, and you can see what state your car's charged at. They didn't need to do it. It's a piece of jewellery, but it looks great.
Just a nice touch, isn't it?
That feature turns on as you walk towards the car, or if you're in it.
It's excellent. I mean, the only real differences I can see between the concept immediately and the production car are that you have slightly larger mirrors now. You have a door pillars where it was completely pillarless across the windows, and the wheels are ever so slightly smaller, but the same design. And apart from the aforementioned lighting on the front, the car looks pretty much the same, and that's a real testament to them because it was so striking in the metal. I thought that does look cool, and it looks purposeful. It really does.
You've touched on something there. I mean, is that one of the things that makes a small car iconic in that way? Is that it's very, very close to the original designer's thinking before the bean counters have got at it, because the bigger companies, the bean counters will attack it immediately, tear strips off it, and make it a much less attractive car. I just wonder if that's a common theme. And with all the iconic cars we've mentioned so far, is it that they are very, very close, or were very, very close to the original design. I mean, the original Mini was very much the Isagonis Mini, was virtually unchanged from his first sketches.
Yeah.
Brilliant engineering.
And that's true for pretty much its entire lifespan, really. It didn't change much. I mean, there were changes to a few bits and pieces throughout its life, obviously, most notably the door hinges on the outside and the grille and bits and pieces. But fundamentally, if you looked at a Mark I Mini and you looked at one of the very last Minis, you could tell they were both the same car,
Yeah.
Albeit that bit wider, bigger wheels, whatever. But this is excellent. I know that when the vehicle was built and when it was going through design, the director of Renault came and just build it like that, make that car. Now it's not a fast car. This isn't the turbo at this point, and they'd be mad if they didn't make one down the line. I'm sure there's one.
I'm sure there will be. I'm sure there will be.
Roughly speaking, 249 miles range, about 25 grand, and a 0 to 60 time of 9 to 12 seconds. So it's not fast for an EV, but we're starting to see this wave of cars coming through.
I don't know. I think the mid powered one, the 121 brake horsepower one, is 0 to 60 in just under 8 seconds. So the 150 brake horsepower one should have hopefully a reasonable shove about it, I would have thought. But the one thing it doesn't do, it doesn't weigh a lot. It's sub 1,500 kilos, which is, if compare that to the original Renault 5, obviously it's a tad more chonky, but with a battery in the bottom and, I don't know, a safety cell and made out of metal rather than tin, etc. It's going to weigh a bit more than the original. But yeah, 1,500 kilos, 150 brake horsepower, that should chug along reasonably well, I would have thought, wouldn't it?
You're right. In fact, it is just under 8 seconds. So it's about as quick as something like an ID3. I think the Born is about the same. If you compare that to other cars that are not especially fast but have that sort of sporting pretense, the Mini I think was 7.2, something similar to that, because it's roughly the same as what mine is. So that's not bad.
It's interesting, the benchmark now appears to be around sort of 7 or 8 seconds, whereas when I first started road testing cars, albeit that was quite a long time ago, the sub 10-second car was the exception. And if you got your hands on one, it was great fun to play with, because most cars were still in the 11, 12 seconds sort of range. Even the avowedly sporty ones were still not that quick. But now that same benchmark is 7 seconds. World of difference.
And I guess we've been so used to talking about electric cars as being 4 or 5 second cars that actually 8 seconds doesn't seem that fast, where it's going to be perfectly acceptable for most people most of the time. And if you compare it to other petrol cars that people might have come from, so bearing in mind that these cars, even the 150 brake horsepower car, isn't the sporty version of this, is just the normal car, isn't it? Yeah, it's going to be enough. I think it's interesting that we've got to this point now where we're starting to see there's a next generation of cars coming through where they aren't all about having ridiculous performance and straight line speed. They're about being cars first that people can achieve and obtain, that are this 25 grand ish sort of price point, rather than being 50 grand and sub 5 seconds. I think it's interesting that it's becoming more mainstream now, isn't it?
So about changes in the thinking on the battery technology, that there's a longer range but basically lesser punch initially, and that's the sort of trade-off that the battery designers, I think, are making.
Yeah. So, and on that note, battery for this one, 52 kilowatts is the larger battery pack that gives you 249 miles. And if you want a smaller battery pack, you can do, obviously a bit cheaper. 40 kilowatt hours would be about 185-ish. In France, 25,000 euros, so about 22 grand, but they haven't told us exactly what it's going to be. But there is another EV in the works. If 25 grand is still looking a bit punchy, there's going to be another Twingo coming, based not on the one that we had in this country, but the one before, that occasionally you see over here in left-hand drive, and you still see bombing around in France with the round headlamps, if you remember those.
Great looking car.
Yeah, quite a cool thing. And supposedly that's going to be sub 17 grand if that does come to fruition. So I understand it's due to come, and then we've got the likes of the VW ID2, which is another great looking car. So there's a few that are concepts and coming through, hopefully, that I think will be really really quite interesting, and some quite interesting retro 80s 90s inspired cars, which of course floats my boat, because it's my kind of era. And clearly they're looking at people that have enjoyed those cars in the past, people that might be coming up to a point where they're able to suddenly afford this type of vehicle and shamelessly going for us. And I've fallen for it hook, line and sinker. I'm not afraid to admit.
Yeah, I think it's a good bandwagon to jump onto, that, isn't it? The 80s, 90s, the retro side. But I think it's true of a lot of things. It's computer games of the time were much more basic. You look at modern games and how realistic the graphics are, and you watch the odd trailer of a computer game, and it takes you a good few seconds to work out that it is a computer game. And then there's the odd angle where you watch it and you think, I cannot tell this apart from real life. This is ridiculous. But are any of the games actually quite as good to play as some of the games that we played when we were younger? It's that, I don't know, there's just that, is it slightly rose-tinted, nostalgic glasses that make you think everything was better, or was it actually better? But, there were, it was maybe the freedom and the experience, and because I was new to it, but the number of times I just went for a drive in the car because I wanted to go for a drive. I'd just cleaned it, so I went for a drive and didn't go anywhere in particular, and that was it. And that was in a Mark II Golf. I probably wouldn't do that in a brand new Fiesta, but I would do it in something like a Caterham or a Lotus or a Morgan or a Ferrari or a whatever. So have everyday cars lost that little bit of sparkle these days?
I think maybe they have. I read, and I know obviously I'm a Mini fan, but I read an interesting
article. You're not that
sure,
don't worry.
I read an interesting article the other day by Henry Catchpole, who was saying that he had one of the original new Minis when they came out, and he wondered whether he was looking at these things with rose-tinted spectacles. But again, you would jump into one of those, and I agree, and go and just enjoy driving it, and it would put a smile on your face, even though it wasn't necessarily the quickest or the most exciting. There were elements of it that, yes, when they first came out, they attracted a lot of looks, I think.
A lot of really good design.
Yeah, I think the likes of this Renault 5 gives you the same thing again. I think when they come out and you first start seeing those running up and down the high street, people will look at those and take notice, because they do look so much different from the homogeneous blobs that you get from in the likes of the ID range. To pick on Volkswagen.
I think our colleague Dave, who the eagle-eyed listeners amongst you will have, of course, realised that he couldn't be with us tonight, but I think he summed it up quite well with, I want one.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much all he had to say on it, isn't it? I want one. You just look at it and just, I'd have one of them. And that's ticked a very large box, I think, that car.
Yeah, I'll be watching that closely. But if that is a bit too much for you, another car that has it is coming soon on the notice of the Twingo and the Renault is the new Dacia Spring, which has had 2 generations abroad but hasn't come across to the UK before now. And if you've not seen this, it's a really pared back EV. This thing is 65 horsepower or 45 horsepower, so not powerful in any stretch. No frills attached, 137 mile range, charging time about 45 minutes at top speed, but it only charged at 48 kilowatts, I think. I may have got that wrong, so please don't quote me on it. But certainly, it's an interesting concept. This is a car that, again, pricing has yet to be confirmed at times of us recording this, but is around about 18 grand abroad.
I think the charging rate of, what do you say, it was 48 kilowatts?
Yeah, I think so. I could be wrong.
But I think that's fine. So I think the battery's about, 26, 27 kilowatt hours, something like that, isn't it? So it doesn't need to be able to charge at 300 gigawatts, does it?
No, this is true. I will look this up whilst we're talking. If you just want a car and you want a small electric car, then this is a 4-seater. I don't think it's even a 5-seater. I think it is a 4-seater. Sensible, small car that gets you from A to B. And it does what Dacias do. It's pared back. It is no frills. It's quite sharply designed, I would say, for what it is.
I was going to say it's got Lamborghini Aventador styling cues about it, I think, hasn't it? Just but mainly in the air vents and the rear lights. I've got that funny little sideways white shape thing going on. Absolutely nothing else about the rest of it looks in any way like a Lamborghini Aventador, but there's a little bit there, isn't there?
Well, it is. There is a steady demand for. It's a phrase I hate, actually. I just want something that gets me from A to B, because that's usually associated with people that aren't very good drivers because they have no interest in driving. But there's always a demand for cars that are very basic.
Yeah, and and if you're listening to this, the chances are you're going to be into cars in some way or another, and we are into our cars. So for us, it's not really enough just to say, well, okay, it's just a car, because we would want something that does a little bit more. And we all know that even if you have a few £1,000s to spend, you can still buy something that's rewarding to drive. The age-old question: what would you buy if you had £2,000? Well, a Mark One Focus, probably, or something similar. A car that does everything but is still interesting or certainly very capable to drive. I'm just going to have a quick max charge rate apparently of the Dacia Spring is 30 kilowatts, a battery size of 27 kilowatt hours.
That's fine. That'll get from 10 to 80% as quick as any other EV on the market, won't it?
Yeah, it's fine. As we say, it's a small car that you're going to be able to use for, I don't know, probably best as a second car, perhaps, if you're not living in
I was
town.
going to say, I don't think this could be your only car, because it's will it be a nice experience to have to go on a long journey in that car, stopping every, there'd be the odd occasion where I'm sure with the charging network being as it is in this country, which is getting better, but it's, there'd be the odd thing where you think, oh no, I can't go that way or that way because the charging points are just too far apart. 130 miles, okay, there will be a reasonable chunk of chargers covered in that 130 miles-ish, but it's, I don't think that's quite usable as an everyday, but of course it's not designed as I go to Scotland 4 times a year, so I'm going to buy one of them. You'd be a bit mad too. But
if your explorations only involve going to the local supermarket on a twice weekly basis, and that's a reality of driving for quite a lot of people, then you just want a budget car that's stripped out with a few frills. And often, if that's the case, then it's aesthetically not terribly interesting either.
Well, I think this is interesting. It has interesting elements to it. It has some quite nice lines on it for what it is. It is relatively interesting. It's not my thing as such, but I think it looks relatively sharp. But you mentioned before about speed and benchmarks, and for anyone that's interested, what this car can possibly do, have a guess what the 0 to 60 time is. I know it's probably largely irrelevant, but I find it amusing nevertheless.
How many weeks?
16 seconds.
16. Go on. Have a guess, Graham.
20.
19.1 seconds to 62
Ooh,
for the 45 horsepower
that is
version.
suboptimal.
And 14 seconds for the higher power.
That's very 70s, very 80s sort of numbers. I mean, if you look at perhaps say a Mark 1 Cortina, something like that, that would probably be 15, from memory, 15, 16 seconds, something of that sort of order. That's quite a throwback. Several generations of both humans and car design.
I think that's actually maybe no bad thing. I could see this appealing to parents of, 17, 18-year-olds that have just learned to drive, just passed their tests. So, a lot of EVs, we're talking of, 150, 200 brake horsepower. Lots of them are rear-wheel drive. So unlikely, dare I say it, that you're going to be splashing out on a brand new EV as your first car. There'll be certainly a lot of parents that want to buy their child a brand new car for their first car for whatever reason, maybe thinking it's safer or whatever else. So what better car to unleash them onto the roads of the UK than 45 rampaging horses? They'll probably be able to control that, I would have thought, until they build up to something better. But it's I don't know how safe it would be though, just with the size of it. I presume it's got some safety features about it.
It does. It hasn't done, as I understand, quite as well in the Euro NCAP testings, but whether that's because of pedestrian safety, I'm not sure.
You're not going to be able to impress your mates by putting a pair of Weber 45s on it and skimming their head. And, that's a thing of the past.
What I was thinking, though, is about that sort of power, 45 horsepower, is probably about the same as what the likes of the Mark III Fiestas that a lot of us were driving when I passed my test were driving, about 45, 47 horsepower. So I bet it's not far off.
I think my R-Reg Polo that was a 1.4 CL had 64, 65 brake horsepower, I think, but you could get that with the 1 litre. So yeah, that was probably in the order of 40-something brake horsepower, but it didn't weigh a lot. My little 1.4, so it chugged along okay, really. It was quite nice to poodle about in. And actually, that car on occasion as well, I would just go out for a drive in because I quite liked it.
My first car, the 51 Ford Anglia, that barely got into double figures as far as brake horsepower went. If you wanted to get to 60 miles an hour, you needed a pretty steep downward slope, a following wind, and a couple of mates pushing. Other than that, 40 was considered pretty good.
A couple of mates to get out would have just been, you don't want the extra ballast.
No, you needed some ballast downhill, but it was useless uphill.
The thing is that Dacia have done research on this, and they've worked out that the average driver of their vehicle does an average speed of 23 miles an hour for 23 miles, apparently is the average journey. So they've focused the performance on being 0 to 30 rather than 0 to 60, which probably makes sense for a city car. And I guess if you've got 137 miles of range, you can see where they're targeting it. The fact that it would make a good first car, I think, is probably a good shout. Do you want to put people into 500-600 horsepower worth of electric car when they first pass their test? No, not really. We all know exactly what would happen.
I'll just tell you a story of how designers and car planners can get these things quite horribly wrong. I can remember when they first brought out the Nissan Micra, and talking to all the design team and talking to the people at Nissan, and this was going to be the next generation of young persons, chic, hip motor cars. It would really catch on in a big way. It did catch on in a big way, but not with its target audience. Its target audience became mostly pensioners over 65s, and there was a very, very simple reason for that. It was easy to get in and out of, and the seats were relatively comfortable, and it was cheap to buy. So all of those things followed. But the fact that it was easy for, as I well know now, getting in and out of cars becomes slightly more difficult with age, and those slightly more difficult in and out were much easier in the Nissan Micra. It was quite tall and quite upright for its design, so they got their target audience completely wrong. But Dacia certainly appear to have, I think, got theirs about right. They know where they're going with that car.
And I think just as a final point that sort of enhances the why should you buy it, reasons to buy it, the new logo, I'm sure we said this before, kind of looks like the old DMC DeLorean logo. So
it definitely does.
That looks quite cool. So
yes.
The DeLorean and Lamborghini styling cues are surely enough just to tempt you into it, basically, aren't they?
Well, I think probably reaching so hard there that you might pull something if you're not careful. We've done 2 electric cars.
No, I'm fully healed. I'm all right now. I'm back to full strength. So don't you worry.
And the Dacia, I'd heard, I don't know how true it is, allegedly, I know we're keen on allegedly, that they could make that 15-16 grand car if they really wanted to, but we'll see. A car with an engine in it now. MG, who have been going great guns with some fantastic electric stuff, are going to bring over some petrol stuff for a change. And they're actually bringing over a petrol MG3 to replace the outgoing old one.
They've got plenty of spare capacity because so much of what they do is electric. They're well in with the ZEV mandate targets and bits and pieces, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. Sales figures for MG4 are just insane, aren't they, really? We think where they were 10 years ago, where they are now, just incredible foothold in the UK. But the new MG3, the old MG3, I can't remember the last time I saw one on the road, but it's going to come with a 1.5 litre petrol engine and as a proper hybrid motor, both of which produce over 100 horsepower or around about 100 horsepower each. So just under together 197 brake horsepower, which sounds pretty racy for my money. Not that the figures would suggest it.
I was really critical of when they first came into the market, but because of the badge engineering, I suppose, and the traditional use of that particular badge and that particular name. But I was wrong, I think, because they've become or evolved into some very, very good and very popular cars. They're not right at the technical cutting edge, but they're not so far from it. And this new one does seem to be a very interesting motor car.
I think the thing is with MG is that each time we've seen a new one, it's not just like they've released a new model at the same spec or technology. Each time we've seen one, it's been another leap forward and forward and forward. And I think what's really interesting with the MG3, apart from the fact that they've introduced petrol, is the fact that they have admitted that they are gunning for Fiesta owners. The Fiesta being obviously a hugely popular car. The cheapest Puma now is £25,700, which is a chunk. But it's also a different car entirely, isn't it, really? Although it's based on a Fiesta, it's that bit taller, it's that bit bigger. And some people do just want that smaller hatchback. just to wild.
But I think what it does give them is that, as you say, it's a good strategy to go after current Fiesta owners, or those looking to change them soon. But it's what it will give them is, well, you're still allowed to sell ICE cars, and you're still allowed to sell ICE cars in reasonable numbers. I think ICE cars at the moment, given investment and bits and pieces, are certainly more profitable than EVs. If you look at them as a cost to the factory, cost of the R&D, etc., and take that into account. But actually what it does give them is it gives them that little bit of market share. And if it puts people in MGs now, when they need to change their car and they have to go all EV in a few years' time because they're in an MG, they will naturally consider an MG for their next product. So what part of the reason I think that Ford had always said they did the Fiesta for all those years, and part of the reasons for selling it like that was it got people into the brand. Everybody's had a Fiesta, everybody and their mums has had a Fiesta. It got you into the brand from day one. And there are certain people who have only ever driven a Ford because their first car was a Ford, only ever driven a VW, a Renault, whatever it is. So it's a good way of capturing that market, even if it's not the most instantly profitable. I think it's a really, 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 really good long-term strategy.
Yeah, I agree.
And just looking at the stats from the press release, I'm sorry I got it wrong, 192 brake horsepower, but 64 mpg combined, which looks pretty good. The old one did about 44, I think. So that's a step forward as well.
I think if you also, and I suspect that this is true, I don't know that this is true, if they have a greater production capacity worldwide than they actually need, then it makes some sense to keep bringing petrol cars into the marketplace now.
Petrol versions of this car, pure petrol car, starting at about 16 grand, hybrid at about 18 grand. Keenly priced, really, and I'm sure they'll be able to do that and make some money at it. So another car I suspect we'll see quite a few of on Britain's roads in the not too distant future. And I guess having summed up a few of our favourite cars that have been released this week, it's probably a good time for us to end. So on that note, we'll see you next time. I've been Mike. Goodbye.
I've been Jim. Get well soon, Mike. Goodbye, everyone.
And I am, I think, still Graham. Just safe driving, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
UK Motor Talk, a First Take Media production.